Hi, and welcome to this Field Technologies webinar, Driving Transformation, Getting Your IT and Service Organization Set Up for Success. I'm Mike Monticello. I'm the editor for Field Technologies, and I'll be moderating today's event. Is your organization new to the cloud, new to field service automation? You're not quite sure what the keys to success are? Well, on today's webinar, you'll be hearing from Alan Alexopoulos, VP of Strategic Services at ServiceMax. He's going to be describing how to create a path to a successful IT and field services deployment. Over the next hour, you'll learn how to map executive-level business objectives to operational success, how to create blueprints to save time and money, and best practices to keep you out of trouble when it comes to your technology investment. In short, we want to fast-track your success. Now, if you have questions, feel free to type them in the Q&A box at any time. After our presentation, time permitting, we'll have a Q&A session. With that said, I'm going to turn it over to Alan to begin the presentation. Alan?
Mike, thank you so much. And everybody, welcome to the webinar. I see in the attendee list we have people from EMEA and the U.S. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, as it were. A little bit about myself. I've been with ServiceMax for about a year now, and I lead an organization focused on our largest customers. And really, we work with these customers to make sure that they have an entire governance structure ready and waiting to help them be successful with ServiceMax technologies. And as Mike suggested in his introduction, some people are coming to this new to the cloud, new to field service automation, and we want to make sure that all of our customers are successful with ServiceMax technology. I bring two unique perspectives to this discussion. One, I spent 15 years in high-tech logistics and field service management globally, as well as 15 years in CRM design, professional services, sales, and customer success. And so with that background, we'll cover a little bit on our agenda. Specifically, we'll talk, what do we mean by transformation, and why do we need it, and how do we get there, and most importantly, what happens if we don't have that? So I'll give you some examples, both good and bad, for what can happen when you don't have the programs to be set up for success. And then lastly, I noticed that in our attendee list, we've got some small companies and we have some large companies represented. And so I'm going to give you both an enterprise perspective and a mid-sized business perspective to solving this problem. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to challenge you. Are you ready for an engagement to implement a new cloud technology, and specifically ServiceMax? Are you really ready? And most importantly, how can you answer the question, how do you know if you're ready? And this really talks to sort of, how you run IT projects, how you work with your business partners, how you understand what you're really trying to accomplish. And in so many cases, we can skip some of the most important processes and steps to ensure that everybody is aligned and everybody is ready to go on a journey to implement a new business system like ServiceMax successfully. And in our experience, we found that there are some key areas to focus on when talking about driving transformation. I think that, it's very common to say, hey, do I have a project governance methodology? Do I know how to run an IT project? And most of you would probably say yes. Some of you have had great success out there implementing technologies. But what we have found is that oftentimes there's important elements of an overall transformation project that are skipped in getting to that project. So I think you need to really back up and think about the planning involved. And we'll talk a little bit about what we mean by planning and give you some examples about how to start that planning process to drive the kind of communication between your business partners and the IT organization to really make sure that happens. And that can be in very large organizations where you've got lots of people contributing to that discussion, or it can be a small organization where you've got an IT project manager and a service manager. So it doesn't have to be a big, drawn-out process, but I think it's really important to make sure that you've started at the top and understand what you're trying to accomplish during that planning step. And then we need to talk about sort of what are the partnerships that need to be in place to ensure success. at the end of the day, we're all people, and people need to work together to make this thing a success. So building the relationships and making sure that everybody is represented in that discussion is a really important element. And then certainly you need to make sure you have the skills necessary to be successful. So assessing who has those skills and then augmenting the team from outside if necessary to bring those skills in is a very important element of the project planning. And then oftentimes, especially in larger organizations, we find that there's program governance and change management around the program that is really, really important to the success. Have you defined how you're going to manifest this change within the organization? How are you going to ensure that all your stakeholders are communicated with on a regular basis, they understand their role in the program, and how they are going to contribute to its success? Similarly, on the technical side, especially if you're new to the cloud or if you're new to Salesforce.com, it's really important to understand the importance of the technical governance to ensure that you don't code yourself into a corner or create a hairball that you're going to have to live with for the rest of the deployment. And I can talk about some examples of how, both good and bad, how you can make sure that you ensure good technical governance. And then certainly project governance is very important. How do these projects work? Certainly ServiceMax and the Salesforce platform give you the opportunity to move quickly, to iterate your ideas and see them quickly, put them in front of users. But and a very important point with project governance is oftentimes we think that because it's a cloud-based platform that you can move through this very easily without the sort of robustness of process that you would typically use with, let's say, an ERP system implementation. And while Salesforce and certainly ServiceMax is not ERP, it does require a similar sort of governance robustness to make sure that you've knocked down methodically all the important steps to ensure a project goes well. And if you've done that well, the last step is ensuring that you've got a quality output for your users, that you've documented what you're doing and why, that you have test plans to ensure that the expected outcomes by the users have been tested thoroughly, and user acceptance and adoption programs to ensure that everybody is aligned and what is finally delivered is meeting the expectations that were set during that planning phase. And so, these are just, simply at a high level, some very key concepts that we find very important to driving that transformation journey. And in terms of why we need enterprise readiness, there's a couple of key things. First is, this is new technology for a lot of people. A lot of people are moving from on-premise solutions, or they're moving from paper, especially if you're a smaller organization. And so you really need to take the opportunity to sort of rethink how you're doing things, or at least validate that the way that you're doing things are the way that is going to serve you well as you move through your implementation journey. And, you need to bring in the right experience. So I talked about having the right skills on the team. You need to make sure that you've got the experience on the team to mitigate your risk during the deployment. As so many people are moving to cloud-based applications, it's just different enough. Don't assume that everything that you learned implementing an on-premise-based tool will serve you well during a cloud-based implementation. Learn from those people who have come before you, certainly. And that's sort of reinforced in this point here. The cloud is just different enough. It'll lure you into that common thing where you think you get it, and then you just say, well, wait a minute, this is different. How does security work? How are my users accessing this system? How is that different than how they were doing it before? And it's really important to understand the differences in cloud-based applications and what they mean to your deployment plan. And then finally, at ServiceMax, the CEO on down, we're looking for raving fans at the end of the day. And we're not happy until you are completely satisfied with your deployment and that your users and the company is getting the benefits that we've established up front in our planning process. And so it's really important to make sure that we go through this process in sufficient detail to make sure that you are successful and that we've set you up for success. Next, what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about sort of two different projects, and these are actual projects at ServiceMax. The names have been changed or redacted to protect the guilty and the innocent, but I'll tell you a little bit about these. The first one was a project that was very much driven, as a regional rollouts where we had strong leaders within the organization and they needed very, very specific things that were unique to their business, and they were adamant about those sorts of things. And there was a lot of autonomous decision making, and ultimately that resulted in low functional reuse. And I'll tell you, as we move through this, when we talk about blueprinting, why that's important and how by allowing regions to just go off and do what they want, that can result in a much higher project cost and a slower rollout overall. The other attribute of this project was sort of limited IT and business partnership. And, IT would build something, throw it over the wall. Business would either accept it and reject it. There's a lot of gamesmanship. And ultimately, when we did a post-mortem on this project together with our executive stakeholders, we found that was a key contributor to some of the challenges we had in this project. And then ultimately, we got there because of heroic efforts by key individuals. And as anybody who has worked on a long-term project knows, that gets old pretty darn fast. And so it's more important to have a good plan and great collaboration across the team to ensure that everybody's on the same page and we know how we're going to get there, and we've got strong project planning. Overall results of this project was 50% over budget, 3 months late, and ultimately after we did our post-mortem on this project, they said, you're right, if we're going to keep doing this, we need to do this differently. And in their case, they established a senior executive who was responsible or who is responsible for overall program governance and for working with all the regions and all the business stakeholders and IT stakeholders to get everybody on the same page. And they've created this very nice gated program where until you get those the key alignments both at the executive and divisional and regional levels, you do not move a program to the next state or to the next step. And what that has created is sort of the environment and the culture where they know that a program will not move to the next step and they won't get anything out of the system until they have supported the important alignment necessary to be successful. So tough moments for both us and the customer. As we move through this journey, I can tell you that we're now about 6 months beyond this point, and the project and the program is now moving in a much more positive direction, and we are continuing to expand our rollout with the improved governance platform in place. Let's contrast that to another very large ServiceMax customer who took the time up front to create the needed alignment and to create a global rollout plan. There were some attributes in this organization that were already in place. I mean, ServiceMax didn't bring any magic pixie dust to the party and said, hey, go do this and you'll be successful. I mean, they already had a culture of this. What we brought to the party is validation that was absolutely the way to go forward. And we brought, some improvements and some best practices from our other customers, both lessons learned as well as best practices from working with several other large global organizations. And, this company already had an ITIL-based approach to readiness planning. And as we move through the presentation, I'll talk a little bit more about what that means. And ServiceMax has developed a very similar methodology for helping our customers validate where they are in their readiness to deploy a ServiceMax solution. And then ultimately, they made the investment of bringing everybody together in a single point. I mean, it was a large investment on their part, both in terms of time and money, to bring all the global leaders from the both business side and IT side to a single 2-week workshop where they hashed out and worked out all the details and got agreement looking into each other's eyes. And I was in these meetings, and I can't tell you how important it was to allow people to air out their differences face to face and ultimately walk out of that room with an agreement to move forward. Now, at the time we did this, we were expecting a 20 to 30% savings compared to regional rollouts. I can tell you that now that we are in the project, we are meeting our expectations in this area. In fact, the first release is ahead of schedule because of some of the advanced planning that we did. Now, it's really easy for us all to sit here and say, well, wait a minute, I have to have this rolled out. I have some critical milestone that I need to hit. I'm retiring an ERP system, or I'm launching a new product. And it's so easy to fall into the trap of saying, I need to get there sooner. I can't do this. I'm telling you, do yourself a favor. Take the time to do some advanced planning, get everybody aligned. You will be better off for it. Our experience tells us that, from a high perspective. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of how we create that foundation for enterprise success. The first thing we do is, in terms of driving the business IT alignment to ensure a successful transformation, is develop that plan. And it's amazing when I ask even senior executives at some of our largest customers, so what's your plan? What are you trying to accomplish? And, everybody can rattle off sort of the key talking points. I said, well, have you written it down? And, how do you translate that to the project and the program teams? And this is oftentimes where organizations break down, or people get their own perspective on what that means. Everybody sort of reads into it, with their own background, their own biases, and it's not clear as the mission and the program translates its way down into the operating troops. And so I think the first thing that you need to do is develop that alignment on your priorities. And so in this case, we have an example of 3 different priorities. Let's grow revenue, let's improve our customer experience, and let's increase productivity of our technician field force. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to turn those priorities into actionable plans. So we're sort of getting down to the next level now. All right, well, how are we going to grow revenue? We're going to improve lead generation, increase technician on-site quoting, and we're going to improve service advisor retention and conversion. So that's sort of taking that grow revenue thing, turn it into the next level down. And as you can see through the other 2 items, let's just take the top and find the top 3, 4, or 5 items. And we don't need to have a laundry list of these things. One of the dynamics that you see often is the more top-level priorities that you have, the more diffused the program becomes. Let's be sharp. Be crisp about what you're trying to accomplish. Don't try to accomplish too much, especially in your first implementation. Have a sharp focus and a clear focus that easily translates into a next set of actions. Now, how do we turn those priorities into actionable plans? What's the next level down? We need to find the enablers of those plans. So here are some examples. Under grow revenue, we're going to grow repair sales, we're going to grow our project sales, and we're going to grow contract sales. So what are the things that we're going to do that enables us to accomplish that? We're going to connect sales and operations in order to grow repair sales. As we take a service call, we're going to toss an opportunity over to the sales team who's going to follow on, try to grow a contract base out of that. And so in your business, you need to find out what those enablers are. Once you've done that across your different priorities, lastly, what you have to do is figure out how to make that measurable. How are we going to know that we actually achieved success with these plans? And what we strongly recommend is that when you get down to this level, when we say we're going to grow repair sales, well, how much are you going to grow sales by? We're going to grow it by 9%. You go figure out what that translates into the dollars. And that is the best sales tool for helping executive management understand what the value that this program is going to bring to your company. And then even more importantly, you're going to build into your implementation plan the reports, the dashboards, and most importantly, the workflows that are going to allow you to track this goal and see how you're doing against it. Later on in the presentation, I'll give you an actual example of how one of the ServiceMax customers did exactly that as we move through the presentation. So this is a very, very simple sort of 4-step process for sort of driving that business and IT alignment. It's it's almost misleading in its simplicity when you see it on paper, but I can tell you it is difficult to sit down and figure out what that is in your business. It takes real effort, it takes real focus and real discipline to get there. So while it looks simple on paper, you need to focus on it to get it done and have it drive all the way down to how your implementation will be driven by these priorities. So, the next thing that I'll focus on is really on governance. And, I mentioned in that one example of project success that our one customer had an ITIL-based approach for understanding whether we were ready and what their readiness was. And here's an example of what ServiceMax does with its customers. We have a program called an Enterprise Assessment that covers 46 different areas in those 6 or 7 areas that I covered at the top of the presentation. And so what we do is we sit down with you, we sort of have a discussion about how you think about each of these areas. How strong is your project management? Do you have a PMO team? Do you need a PMO team? How do you measure success? Do you have a plan? Is everybody on the same page? And we sit down together and we sort of assess where we are, and then you can see what we do is we grade where we are on 46 different areas. And then ultimately, and we're grading on a scale here, where we are seeing, which areas do we really need to focus on, which would be a 1 or a red or a 2 or a yellow. And then we start to put together the action plans that are going to make sure that we've got the necessary corrective action to address any high criticality areas. And so, once you've done that, what happens is it results in a bunch of output that we like to put into something called the Strategic Customer Plan. And this can be as simple or as complex as it needs to be based on your organizational complexity. But the ServiceMax Strategic Customer Plan has things like your PMO and governance approach, a forecast of users and data volumes by group, by region, a multi-year deployment plan, what your project management approach is, what your training plans are, what your deployment readiness plans are, how you define quality, how you define the support processes to support this both for your users and from you to ServiceMax, what your user acceptance plans are, adoption plans, and what the success criteria is for the deployment. And these are all things that go into this document that becomes a living document that we sort of manage with you to ensure that everybody stays on the same page as we go through this implementation journey. Because as we all know, people come and go, and so this provides a single point of focus for everybody to understand what we're trying to accomplish and how we're trying to accomplish something. And then lastly, the functional blueprint. And this is really critical for helping people understand what functionality is going to help drive them to get the benefit out of the ServiceMax solution that they were expecting. And so what the blueprint does is helps define that baseline of functionality for a global deployment or even a regional deployment. So if you're a smaller organization, this is absolutely important. Obviously, it will be simpler. But it's really important to sort of understand the progression that you need to take so that you don't waste money developing configurations or features that ultimately don't deliver the value that your plan says that you need to have. And the blueprint really has a couple of different elements. What is your mobility strategy? What are your field service processes and flows? What's the integration strategy? What is your program management strategy? And what are the ROI objectives, as I've talked about during the planning phase of your program? If you pull all those things together and you create this functional blueprint, what you're going to see is overall lower cost of ownership, as our two customer examples sort of highlighted. Right? You're getting there faster, even though you're taking a little bit more time up front to develop this blueprint. And so, to make this a little bit more real, here's your typical wedding cake picture, and you can see the Salesforce One platform. You can see ServiceMax and what ServiceMax does on top of that. And then really what we like to focus on is what are those specific customer elements that are going to help us achieve that time to value and lower overall investment. And what we're trying to achieve here is an 80% base configuration so that 80% of your workflows are the same worldwide or across the regions or across the various teams. Find ways to drive commonality, and then limit the 20% to either divisional or geographic specific requirements. And then think of them that way, right? So that I've got a base configuration for how I track time for my field techs. But then I know that in Germany, I need some very specific things because I have very specific German work rules. And so build that 20% on top of this common foundation so that it's easier to maintain and that you only have this thin slice of customization or regionally specific configuration on top of that 80%. And why that's important is because you're going to find after doing something for Germany, you're going to get down to some other country and you're going to say, hey, remember those work rules for Germany? We have the same requirements in Belgium. So now that we can take something off the shelf and deploy it with limited additional effort to Belgium without reinventing the wheel. And then lastly, on the blueprint, how do we think about this, and how do we sort of get our mind around this? And this is a bit of an eye chart for you probably, but what this shows is in the first column here, the tier 1 processes that are typically supported within ServiceMax. So this first category is work order management, which is a strong focal point for ServiceMax. The second column are all the typical tier 2 processes or the next level down that our customers typically do inside of ServiceMax. And then again, deceptively simple in its presentation, but kind of hard to get there. And what you'll do is, let's take the very first row here. You'll take break, fix, repair. And you're going to say, I want to have a strong repair capability, so maybe I'm going to start with a 70% solution, and then I'm going to build on top of that in my next release or for my next division. And what we often see, especially for global rollouts, is customers will start their first division in a region that has lower requirements. Latin America is very typically a first rollout. And so what you'll see here is that you'll use this grading scale over here to sort of say, hey, I'm going to do sort of a 40% in installations, or depot repair, I'm going to do 30%. And then in my next iterations, or as I add regions, I'm going to add additional functionality. And then what you see in this sort of a heat map approach here is you see functionality building on top. You're not trying to solve world hunger in the very first release. And think of this first deployment column as your MVP, your minimum viable product to get out to the region that has the least amount. Because one thing I will guarantee you, you will gain experience with the system. You'll see what works well for you, what did not work well for you. Everybody has gone through training, but until they've gone through their first deployment, they really don't understand exactly what that system can do for them. And we don't want you to overinvest in that first deployment, because you're going to learn so much that will help inform how you go forward in your subsequent phases. And so at the end of the day, this provides a nice visual for everybody to sort of get their heads around what we're doing under what time frame. All right, so after the blueprint, I think that in summary, from a process standpoint, if you put together that overall program governance and a global deployment, program, ultimately you're going to get there. And, everybody and their brother will tell you that, one of the most important things that IT does for a company is ensures that the IT strategies are aligned and support the business and deliver the value. And so, Deloitte here absolutely reinforces that. Invest in these things and they will serve you well. All right, what I'd like to do next is talk a little bit about transformation from a customer's perspective. And so, I've talked mainly from an enterprise perspective and given you some examples of large, complex organizations. But I think what you're going to see is that Westmore, who has been a ServiceMax customer now for over a year, has taken all of these same themes and deployed them in exactly the same fashion, but in a manner that is very, very appropriate for the size of their organization. So Westmore is a fueling equipment and services provider in Morris, Minnesota. They've got about 40 techs on 4 teams, and it's a small organization, but they've been wildly successful following this approach to deploy ServiceMax. And so you can see that your organization may be more like this than, let's say, a General Electric, which has 40 different P&Ls and 13 different implementations and a lot of regional complexity. Their services background, they've been doing service okay for about 15 years, but were challenged. They weren't sort of getting to the next level. They knew that they needed to change. And so ultimately they selected ServiceMax after a review of the products out there in the market, and then they went on their ServiceMax journey. And their journey was fairly typical. They created a requirements list. They spent a year documenting the as-is processes, defining their to-be processes. So here's an example of what I mentioned earlier, where rather than just rushing in and implementing the system, they took the time to understand their business and where they wanted their business to go. And they tried some things along the way, and ultimately they compared ServiceMax with other solutions along the way, sort of revalidating that they made the right decision, and decided what they needed to support their business going forward. And then they chose ServiceMax for the front end and Magic Software as middleware to integrate with their ERP, which made integration much, much less complex. They refined their requirements by working with a ServiceMax partner who had other experience working with sort of mid-sized companies. And so they were able to guide them and help them understand where not to overinvest in the solution, especially in their first iteration. And then most importantly, and I was very impressed by this, they created their key performance indicators with IT and service marketing before they even started the project. So this is a great example of the planning that I mentioned earlier, right? And if you can see these charts here, this first one on the left here is one that particularly impressed me and really talks about how overall DSO and time to invoice got so much better as they implemented the system. And the visibility that they got in the system was great. And you can see it on the chart on the right, where they now have great visibility about where tech profitability is and where this was a black hole previously. And then, lastly, they implemented ServiceMax in 6 months. And they sort of learned along the way that the technical ready date and the true rollout were not quite the same. So what does that mean? I think what it means after talking with this team is that the system was they had a service manager, they had a power user or a super user from the field, and they had IT, and they had their to-be processes. They mapped these to-be processes in, but then when they sort of rolled those out, that even after the best planning and an extensive analysis of what they were trying to accomplish, they learned some things even as they rolled it out. And so this really talks to the need to have strong user acceptance testing. It can be informal, especially in a small organization. But what they found was that last 3 months was de facto user acceptance testing. And what they found was, oops, we missed something. So we needed to go back and address it. And so ultimately they got there. It took a little bit longer than they expected, but they followed that process that we recommended, even if some of it came and took a little bit longer than expected. In their postmortem with their executives 2 months after the rollout, they reviewed cost, functionality, times, and lessons learned, and this has been viewed as a wild success within the company. The kind of visibility that they're getting around what the technicians are doing it, the time that they're taking to do it, the inefficiencies in the field are now exposed for everybody to see. Not because technicians don't do a good job, but because there are obstacles to them becoming successful. And so the transparency that ServiceMax brings you in this was there for everybody to see, and they could see exactly what kind of productivity and impact that the system was having on the overall company. And so the results after their first year, number of work orders were up by 27%, number of technicians up by 50%, 56%. I said, well, wait a minute. Why do you need more technicians? And my first thought there was, well, do they need more technicians to get the same work done? And the answer was no. They were able to improve overall profitability. They grew their business and were able to hire additional technicians and now had the platform that would scale and allow them to bring those additional technicians on successfully. They were able to save over 10 hours a week by automating repetitive manual office tasks. And then overall utilization and productivity went up by 20%. And that was part of what helped fund the growth in the business, as well as getting paid faster, so your DSO goes down, cash flow improves, the overall health of the business was dramatically improved, and because this is a services business, that is core to the overall company's mission. So this allowed this company to sort of get off the plateau that they were on and start growing again. And then lastly, in summary, they found that there was no silver bullets to implementing. It was a tough journey to go on. Every project takes a lot of initiative and endurance. They insisted on project ownership by all affected departments. And again, that goes back to sort of the partnership discussion that we talked about earlier, and making sure that you had great strategic alignment between business and IT. And they demanded, functional and integrated testing by all those same departments to make sure that they had the buy-in by the users. And I can tell you from experience in larger enterprise engagements, this is even more critical, especially when you're automating field technicians who were used to dealing with a clipboard and a pen, right? Bringing those people along who sometimes have been doing the same job the same way for 30 years really takes a lot of discipline, a real conscious effort in change management, and really making sure that you are addressing their overall needs. You need a positive leader. If people are taking pot shots at the project, it makes it really hard, because people look at what leaders think are important and they get on board and they'll take leads from that. And so, I can't stress enough how important it is to have strong and vocal leadership in support of your programs. I mean, you're spending a lot of money. And even in a small organization, it may not be a lot of dollars, but it's for the organization, it's a lot. And so it's a huge investment in dollars and people's time. And so you as a leader, you can improve your odds of getting the ROI that you're expecting out of your solution by providing strong and vocal leadership to your teams, making sure they're aligned and that they know that this is important to you. And then lastly, they changed processes and implemented ServiceMax, which led to other wins. They found some things along the way that they hadn't anticipated, so they were flexible and made sure that they brought those things in and took advantage of the things that they learned along the way. And so, there I think I've given you a perspective from sort of an enterprise. I've given you some process things, and I've given you a perspective from a small business. And I think the thing that I would like to leave you with is that these themes are things that we've seen across, over 450 ServiceMax customers. These themes all hold true. They'll be different in each of your organizations. You don't have to do them exactly as I've laid them out here. But what we found is, and as evidenced by the Westmore experience, tune them for your environment, and you will ultimately be successful rolling out ServiceMax technology. And with that, Mike, I'd like to go ahead and turn this back over to you and see if there are any questions from the field.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. That's some great education there. So as Alan said, we've got some time for some questions. You can ask them via the interface on your screen, and we've got some already here. Let's see. What are the types of issues you address in technical governance?
Good question. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, in technical governance, especially for people who are new to the service or the Salesforce platform, what we find is that you're used to living in an environment where you own your computing resources. And the first thing that you learn within any cloud-based environment, but especially within the Salesforce environment, is that it's easy to go crazy writing triggers or creating configurations that take up a lot of machine time. And one example in the Salesforce is governor limits. And so one of the things we need to understand up front is how are you using Sales Cloud and Service Cloud, and where are you in sort of the overall health of any customizations or configurations that you've done, and then as we bring ServiceMax on, where are we going to invest so that we don't hit governor limits? One of the things I mentioned in the customer strategic plan was understanding the volumes and numbers of users to be deployed over time. Another example of where this comes into play with technical governance, if I have that forecast and I'm writing a trigger or doing other configuration that will start to get us closer to those governor limits, I can anticipate that, either refactor code or find other ways to stay away from those governor limits. Other examples are making sure that you have coding standards so that you're not creating a maintenance hairball. There are several ServiceMax customers who have come back to us after trying to do what ServiceMax does in Sales Cloud and have had difficulty doing that and have created lots of customization. And what they found is while they could meet their functional objectives, what they ended up with was a much higher maintenance overhead for doing that. And what we've done is brought them back into standard out-of-the-box product from ServiceMax wherever possible to stay away from that technical hairball. So I hope that helps answer the question.
All right. Yeah, that's great. So let's see, another question here. Where and how does the PTC integration fit into this? And I'm wondering if you could maybe just also share some details about this partnership for those who are unaware.
Yeah, certainly. So for those that don't know, PTC and ServiceMax last month announced a partnership to integrate our products. PTC is an innovator in IoT, Internet of Things space, as well as having tools for knowledge management and other things that are often integrated with a ServiceMax solution. So ServiceMax and PTC are currently working on an integration roadmap that will come out increasingly over the next month or two. I'm working, specifically with one very large customer on that integration roadmap to integrate for IoT. And so imagine a world where a medical monitor phones home via an IoT integration, and if it hits certain thresholds and certain readings, it automatically generates a work order in ServiceMax. And the ServiceMax contract is evaluated. We figure out what is covered and what is not. We automatically dispatch a technician based on the parameters in that service contract. And even before the client knows it, we are already proactively reaching out to that client to say, hey, this medical machine is having a problem. It's covered under your contract. We'll be out there on Tuesday. That is one example of the vision that PTC and ServiceMax has. The other area is knowledge management, so being able to take all the knowledge management tools and content that is managed with PTC knowledge management tools and have that available at the right time on both mobile and online clients for use by field technicians. Those are two key areas that are in the integration roadmap, and I think what you'll see in a series of webinars and announcements over the coming months is more and more specifics, and I fully expect that we'll have the first fruits of that integration before the end of the year.
All right, phenomenal. So we still have some time for questions. Feel free to ask them. You go in that Q&A box, type in your question, hit submit. We got Alan here who's an expert in best practices, so take advantage. Another question here. Why does the blueprint approach save time if it takes additional time to create the blueprint up front?
Yeah, so the blueprint, oftentimes, on average, we'd like to budget about 6 weeks for this this effort. It's sort of broken up into 3 phases. So it's, it's not a lot of additional time, but I can tell you when you add up, let's take, for example, 6 weeks of delay time, and let's just call it a delay before you can start that first phase. But when you look at say 4 or 5 phased rollouts over time, you're going to decrease the overall time that it takes to do each of those phases. And maybe your MVP or your minimum viable product takes 3 months to configure and deploy, but the subsequent phases, because you've already thought about how you're going to build on top of that MVP, are going to take less time. And oftentimes what we'll see is that without the blueprint, it will be 6 months for the first one, and then 4 months, 4 months, 4 months, 4 months. And what we see with the blueprint approach, it will be 3 to 4 months, and then 2 months, 2 months, 2 months, 2 months. And then when you net it out over a 4 or 5 phase project, it takes less time, and there's more reuse, and it takes less overall effort to get that to that same deliverable. And so, your mileage is going to vary. It really depends on what's the minimum acceptable or the minimum viable product for you and so forth. But what we found in a lot of different permutations is that this overall model does work. And this is something that ServiceMax is going to be rolling out over the next couple of quarters and making available to any ServiceMax customer, where you can engage ServiceMax professional services on a blueprint engagement to help you define these things with a set of deliverables, everything from an executive presentation down to budgetary estimates for all of your phases, and an SOW for that first phase.
Okay, great. Another question here. You talked a little bit in your presentation about enterprise and mid-sized businesses of all size, actually. So the question is, what are the differences in these processes between enterprise and mid-sized businesses?
Yeah, so let's take an example. At Westmore, the leaders was, an IT project manager, because IT is about 3 people, and the field service manager. There's only a single field service manager. So they played sort of dual roles of project manager, visionary leader. They were the ones that did the process. And so, in a smaller organization, you're collapsing many roles into fewer people. And that allows you to move quicker, frankly. Decision making is certainly simplified. Now let's contrast that to an enterprise. One customer I'm working for has, a team of 15 business analysts who are doing that as is and to be processes. You have a global services leader who has regional leaders. These regional leaders have certain levels of autonomy, both in terms of budget and what's important to drive their business. They're the ones that are tasked with overall profitability in their business. So with that responsibility comes the autonomy to do what they want. And so that creates an environment where it's sort of tough to get everybody aligned up. And so I mentioned bringing everybody together and then having that strong global leader who is saying, hey guys, this is important to me. I'm going to measure you on the success of this program. Go figure out how to map to this model. And so in that case, it took, much longer than 6 weeks to get to an agreed upon blueprint. And so though that is just one example, the further you get down into the program, I think that, your ability to make changes in the program is much simpler and faster in a smaller program, but it still sort of adheres to the spirit of both the cloud-based environment and the ability and wanting to be agile in both your development methodology and how you think about deploying something. If you hit a wall, shoot, how are we going to go work around that and find a way to solution this? Because the way we thought we could do it wouldn't. And so that happens much faster and without as much sort of tying out as it would be with an enterprise organization.
All right, great. Well, I think that's going to do it, Alan. If anyone has any questions that they think of after this presentation, do you have some kind of way that they could contact you or preferred method of getting in touch?
Absolutely. We will be, we will be making these presentation materials available, and I will make my contact information available for anybody who has follow-up questions. I did give an example or a version of this presentation at our Maximize conference back in March, and that is exactly what happened. We had several people come in after the fact and want to learn more, and so I'm more than happy to help.
Okay, great. Yeah, you gave a ton of great information, probably a lot to absorb here. So, well, I'd like to thank you for your time today, Alan. We really appreciate you coming and sharing all this great information with us.
My pleasure.
I'd like to thank you so much for joining us today for this Field Technologies webinar. We hope we've given you some actionable and empowering information relating to getting your IT and service organization set up for success. Have a fantastic remainder to your day.